Warning! This episode contains some strong language. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to Tales from the Trunk, reading the stories that didn't make it. I'm Hilary B. Bisenieks. Listeners, I am super thrilled today to welcome somebody who I've been telling, anytime you want to come on this podcast, absolutely feel free. Probably since about the time I started the podcast, Laura Blackwell. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. This is a case where you've actually beaten me to the punch because you had me on Story Hour, 2-3 years ago?
It's been a while, and we should do that again.
We should do that again. I probably have another story I can read. We will be talking about Story Hour more in a little bit, but first of all, we're going to be reading part of your story, Poor Prisoners. Is there anything we need to know before we get into this? And I know that we have a lot to talk about afterwards.
Well, I think that as I read, you'll start to see some of the reasons for why this story is not ever going to see the light of day in print. It's pretty bad, Hilary. It's from 2016, and looking back, I'm just so gratified to see that growth can continue all through life.
Yeah, I have a story that is not leaving the trunk that I wrote in 2016.
And, I'm not a quitter. I don't like giving up on stories easily, but I had put this one aside, and some recent events made me think maybe I should look at it again. And I went and looked at it again, and perspective told me that I did indeed have something to read for you on this show.
All right. Well, excited to get into this.
All right. Poor Prisoners. Oh, I should warn you that I'm going to be attempting a few vague accents just so you can tell who's talking.
Fabulous.
Okay. So, Poor Prisoners. I flashed my ID card fast, hoping the unsmiling middle-aged man who'd hailed me would take it for an official badge and not just a key card for getting into work. Page Gregory, Department of Justice. He wore jeans and a plain parka, but he stood like a cop, firmly rooted to the stone-look ceramic floor tiles of the Grand Forks International Airport lobby. No melted snow puddled under his boots. He must have been waiting for a while. Doug Amundsen, Criminal Investigations. Good to meet you. Was the DOJ taking over? We just want to see what you've learned. It was what Hallie had told me to say, and it was most of the truth. She had cautioned me to stay as close to the truth as possible. Shouldering my carry-on, I asked, any developments to the manhunt while I was in the air? Let's talk in the car. He gestured for me to walk ahead of him. I breathed a sigh of relief. Detective or not, he was buying it, just as Hallie had said he would. Just enough people in the government owed Hallie just enough favors that she'd had someone call ahead to say an investigator was on the way. I had no training in field operations, and she wouldn't have sent me if she'd had anyone with a more suitable skill set. I didn't owe Hallie anything. I was just loyal. The chill hovering around the sodden doormats wasn't enough to prepare me for the blast that hit when we stepped outside. The cold slammed up through the soles of my dress boots, bit at my uncovered ears, made my exposed teeth ache. It wiped the smile clean off my face. Amundsen turned the sedan's heat on full blast, but the chilly vinyl seat still made me shiver. What's the latest? I asked. Depends on what you already know. Amundsen aimed the car down a stretch of straight smoke-colored highway edged by a low wall of chunky graying snow. A gray sky pressed down, flattening the landscape. I'd never seen a place so drained of color. Hallie wanted to know if Gatz's conditioning was wearing off. It wasn't supposed to, but then the project wasn't supposed to get defunded either. Our file on Gatz is classified, If you can tell me about the murder, I might be able to help you figure out why he did what he did. We're still trying to establish motive. The car started to slip to the right. Amundsen corrected it by steering into the skid. It didn't break his chain of thought. What can you tell me from your file? We're not ruling out a psychotic break. Hallie didn't want anybody digging into Gatz's history. The now-defunct secret project for the now-defunct secret lab had set him up with a backstory in Jamestown, but it might not hold up under scrutiny. But we'd like to know what made him crack. Still looking for a link between Gatz and the victim. As far as we know, the first time he saw Caitlin McMurray was on stage the night of the murder. During intermission, he left the audience, got backstage, and caved her head in with a Fresnel light. I pulled up the Grand Forks Herald's article on my phone. In a posed photo, a slim young woman beamed over her shoulder, long brown hair spilling down her back. The article said she was a sophomore at the University of North Dakota, which put on the play. If there's a way to make sense of it, we will. I'll hold you to that. Who is she playing? The article said she was starring in Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale, but I didn't know what part that meant. The Lost Princess Perdita? It was, shoot. The same name as that girl in the Hogwarts movies. Hermione? That's it. Been a while since I watched those with my son. An eddy of snow swirled across the road ahead of us, and a gust of wind shook the car. I'd seen drifting snow in D.C., but never in a space so wide and open. I thought for a second it would push us off the road. I'd read Shakespeare less than a decade ago, trying to show Hallie that my associate's degree didn't keep me from being a thinker. It felt like a past life. Hermione's not a big role, is it? I think she's a queen who gets falsely accused and is locked up for most of the play. I haven't seen the whole thing. I asked about the landmarks we passed. How old was that brick building? Was that an outdoor skating rink in the park? But my attempts at flattering interest didn't result in an outpouring of civic pride. I spotted a paperback on the seat. The cover showed a face rising spookily out of a brilliant shade of evening blue. Are you reading The Great Gatsby? Oh, my son left his copy at home, wanted me to bring it to him. Amundsen shook his head. Thought he couldn't get through study hall without that exact copy and the exact bookmarks he put in it. Didn't make it there in time, but the school library has copies. You're a good dad, I said, envious. You have kids? He kept his eyes on the road, or as much of it as the snow let peek through. It's not a question I get often with my round baby face and lack of a wedding ring. No, I like them, but I'm not ready. I didn't like discussing my personal life, but building rapport was useful. Hallie said I was good at that, ever since that day I found out it was her birthday. I got a cake and had them write Henrietta on it instead of Dr. Jacobs. When she asked me why, I told her it seemed cold to put somebody's resume name on a birthday cake, and she laughed in surprise. And she asked me to call her Hallie, her family nickname, even though she was 30 years my senior and I was just an admin at her lab. I became her personal assistant, and I learned what the project really was. To Amundsen, I added, it's nice of you to try to get your son's book to him. I don't know that it's the best thing. He's a good kid, but shortcuts make people lazy. After digesting this a moment, I asked, can we see the crime scene? Not much point. Forensics has been over it. You been traveling all day? There were no direct flights from D.C. to Grand Forks, and he had to know that. If the crime scene's a wash, I'll come with you on interviews or go over evidence you've collected. Where are you staying? I named a chain hotel near the mall. It offered a ridiculously cheap rate and didn't require a credit card for deposit. Just the thing, since Hallie couldn't officially reimburse for this trip. The wad of cash she'd couriered to my apartment seemed ample, but I had to be careful. Jet lag's a bear with the time zone change. I'll drop you off. Once in my bland hotel room, I paced, talking to Hallie on the burner phone she'd given me. The crime scene is important. Hallie lectured me quietly in her flat Nebraska accent. Voice was thinner than when I'd worked for her, and I felt a pang. Was this what it was like for people who saw their parents aging? We need to know if Gatz's conditioning is unraveling. I'd like to, but I don't see how a university theater would spark anything from his former life, I said, pacing the compacted carpet. It's not like it's a soccer field or something. You only know the parts of his life that made it into the papers. His father worked in a movie theater. Maybe there's something about the layout of the theater or the seats. I'll see what I can find out. You're doing great work, Paige. Her voice warmed slightly, and I could tell she was smiling. I always know I can count on you. There was a time when Hallie had a large staff to count on. Psychologists, plastic surgeons, hypnotists, IT and support staff. The experiment had ramifications for everything from witness protection to rehabilitation to prison crowding and beyond. It wasn't cheap to run, though, so once its main backer lost re-election, that was it. Stay inside in case you're being watched, Hallie cautioned before hanging up, and drink lots of water. Air travel is dehydrating. I skimmed news updates and The Winter's Tale on my phone. I'd remembered the play accurately, but I didn't feel much for misplaced Princess Perdita. I felt worse for Queen Hermione, falsely accused of adultery, and her son, who wasted away in sorrow during her imprisonment. Her friend Paulina was the only person in the play who seemed to have her head screwed on straight, standing up to the king and somehow resurrecting the dead queen at the end. I wished Caitlin McMurray had a friend like her. I wished I did. Of course, the murder was the leading item in the local 5 o'clock news. James Gatz's whereabouts were unknown. The photo on the screen showed the broad cheekbones and thin eyebrows of his new face. I had only seen his other face, before plastic surgery and iris implants. Even the dull expression in his now blue eyes looked unfamiliar. Co-workers at the sugar beet refinery in East Grand Forks described him as a mild-mannered man who kept to himself and worked the night shift whenever possible. Everybody was surprised, just like they had been at his crimes years before, when he was somebody else. Gatz's co-workers didn't know about that. Hallie wanted me to make sure nobody made the connection. Is that a good place to stop?
Whew. Absolutely. Oh,
I mean, I could go a little on, but it goes on, Hilary. That's the problem. It goes on.
So the first thing that always strikes me is like, it's so much easier to judge our own work more harshly than we judge other people's. Followed immediately by my second thoughts of, oh yeah, I can see even from here, like, you know, like there are some interesting bones here, but also.
Right. And I had actually thought I might stop a bit further on, and then I was just like, oh my God, no. I don't want to just keep reading through this thing.
Yeah, it's really, I had a very interesting sort of related experience recently, which I think bears telling to our audience, which is, do you remember LiveJournal?
Yes, I remember LiveJournal.
So I was talking with some friends on Discord the other day, and the subject of LiveJournal came up, and I was like, I wonder exactly how old my LiveJournal is, and I know it's still online. I am not linking it in the show notes, dear listeners.
You left it at LiveJournal?
I left it at LiveJournal. I blogged for a solid decade there, from 2004 to 2014, and then I just let it go.
You know, somebody creepy bought LiveJournal, and so I moved everything over to Dreamwidth.
Yeah.
And that's where mine is now, but, you know, I haven't touched it in ages.
Yeah. But I looked back, the person who brought it up was like, you could not pay me enough money in the world to get me to read my early LiveJournal entries. And I was like, well, my whole brand at this point is getting other people to read old stuff. I can stand to go back and read a couple of my old journal entries. And it was really, I think, kind of really instructive of, like, seeing where I was 20 years ago and seeing, like, oh, you know, the bones are there. Like, that's the same person. They just haven't figured out a lot of things. And, like, that's the same thing when we look. Like, I wouldn't want to be them again.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, knowing that person, like, seeing the direct lines between that person and who I am now felt very similar to, like, I can still pull up writing that I did then and see the lines between that writing, that fiction that I wrote then, and the fiction that I'm writing now. And it's just really interesting, and I think it's something I know a lot of people feel have a lot of cringe feelings about their past work, and I would strongly recommend listeners, if you can, go and look at something that you wrote 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, if you have it, and, like, treat it as if you're an archaeologist.
Mm-hmm. It's true. And it's funny, too, because there are some things that that are from the same vintage or even a little older that I actually still like.
Mm-hmm.
Some things that gelled better. Bitter Perfume was my first professional sale to She Walks in Shadows, and I still like that story. It's 10 years old. You know, there's a phrase in it I still wish that I had tweaked, but all in all, I really still like that story. But this one, I'm just like, wow, you know, I can see how there are things that I'm working with even now because they were important then, but I wasn't doing it right. And I feel like maybe there's some things you just sort of keep working through until you've gotten it out. You know, more recently, I've been working with this same idea of a mentor who you really, really look up to, who is deeply, deeply flawed and turns out to be doing maybe not more harm than good, but well, no, more harm than good.
Yeah.
More harm along with the good.
Absolutely. And that's something that, like, is, you know, we talk a lot about killing your darlings as being one of those just sort of, like, you know, we have a lot of writer cliches, and really it's less that you should kill your darlings and more that you should just, you know, suggest to your darlings that you've got a really nice barrel of wine in the basement and you'd love to show it to them. And then just keep them down there for a while and, you know, eventually maybe you need them again.
Nurture your darlings.
Nurture your darlings.
I mean,
screen.
I think the whole kill your darlings thing made a whole lot more sense when we didn't have personal computers. And I think that the advice is from then, because that's, you know, that's from the era when you had to just put a line through something that you had written with your typewriter. And, you know, now you can cut and paste it and put it in another document and, you know, go back and look at it later and figure out someplace it might actually make more sense.
Or you can do like my dad does, who still writes everything either on the typewriter or longhand, and just put editing marks around it to say, this would be better over here. He's got an essay he's been working on for probably 15 years that is spread across, you know, 5 or 6 semi-complete drafts and then a lot of just random pieces of scrap paper with his scribblings on, you know, like in the margins of a different thing. Or like...
Yeah, I can only imagine how interesting those files must look. I just have Word docs of this kind of stuff, but I know some people actually keep these big bonkers looking boards where they pin up all of their stray ideas and move them around.
Yeah. Yeah, well, a constant refrain on here is go listen to the episode of... It was not We Make Books, it was before We Make Books, I believe, but in the We Make Books feed, that Rekka talked to Macey about her Murderboard method.
Yeah, I've heard you mention that. I need to go look that up.
Links, again, will be in the show notes. I will try to remember to send you a link to it afterwards. I also pulled it down and saved it for my own self because I don't know how long the We Make Books feed will still remain up.
How long is anything going to be up? You just never know.
Yeah. But like that's the sort of thing where it's like, or I had an idea that I was just talking about this on the episode that you, dear listeners, won't hear for another month, but I recorded it yesterday because podcast time is fake. Talking about a story that I initially wrote in, I think, 2013, maybe 2014, that the bones were really interesting. I couldn't make the story work. I tried to make it work as a traditional story twice. I tried to turn it into an piece of interactive fiction using twine. A year or two later, couldn't make that work. And I finally turned the core conceit into a solo journaling game the year before last. Mm-hmm. And it just goes to show, like, hang on to those ideas that you find interesting, because you're gonna. I just got a rejection on, I think, the final version of a story that the core conceit of it is literally the core conceit of the first short story I ever tried to sell almost 20 years ago.
Uh-huh.
And it's
that's
like,
still important to you. You remember the things that are still important to you. And you find a way. Important. You find a way.
Yeah. But it's like, it transformed from that first one was urban fantasy, detective fiction, hard-boiled, by someone who had zero genre awareness or savvy. Mm-hmm. Very much wearing all of my literary influences on my sleeve at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And turned, and was like 7,500 words or something long. Mm-hmm. And I turned the core conceit of that into a 400-word flash fiction story about being trans.
Because sometimes that's the part that matters.
Yeah.
That there's just a flash's worth in a novelette sometimes.
Yeah. It's wild.
Yeah, and I think that this story, for starters, was not the right size. It definitely was not the right pace.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, did it sound like at the beginning of a short story to you?
No. Sounded like the beginning of a novella, probably.
Right. I mean, this is a problem, right? That a lot of people think, oh, I'll write a short story because it's easier, and then I'll write a novel, but they haven't read enough short stories to really be good at writing short stories. And so, they write something that begins like a novel.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the problem with this. Part of it is also, as you were saying, the genre awareness, because, it's definitely got some science fiction underpinnings, but it is on some level, it is really more of a mystery story with a little bit of a thriller stuff near the end that's really poorly done. And I read mysteries sometimes, but I don't really know how to write them. I mean, even now I don't, because I just haven't invested in that.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? Maybe I would not be good at it even if I did really, really try. But, sitting down and writing this, I learned some things about what just wasn't working.
Mm-hmm.
About things I just didn't know enough about. One thing that was really funny about it was that some people I knew were putting together a crime and mystery book with women's perspectives. And they were like, well, we'd love to have some stuff to look at. We'll give you a lot of feedback if you're in early. And so, I'm like, okay, let's see if they like this. Let's see how I did. Mm-hmm. And the feedback I got was, have you ever had a critique group?
Oh, harsh.
I know, which is just like the most damning thing.
That
And
is
I was just
gutting.
like, oh my God, are you kidding? Of course I have critique groups. This has been beta read. I've had published short stories. I know how to write a story. But, I didn't have a mystery critique group. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
have a thriller critique group.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm not sure that even that would have saved this,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it would have taught me some things. There are a lot of other reasons that I'm not comfortable with this story and that I really decided to abandon it that we can talk
Right.
about later if you want. But that was one thing, the lack of genre awareness. I tend to play with genres a lot anyway, because I tend to
Mm-hmm.
just sort of tell the story I want to tell and try to figure out where to put it later,
Yeah. I mean,
which,
like gender, genre is fake.
well, it
So,
kind of is, except that, there except that then, readers go and look for things by shelf and by
yeah,
category and by tag, and so do editors. Editors
that's very
have
true.
a magazine to put forward, and the magazine is really very rarely just, hey, I'm so and so, and this is stuff I like.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually a bit more focused than that. Just
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so,
Even
yeah.
even the one time I was a submissions editor for just a single issue of a magazine, when me and Annalie Flower Horn did the Quaker science fiction in Friends Journal back in 2021.
Is it that long ago now?
I feel like it has to have been, but that also feels wildly fake.
Yeah, just like genre and gender.
Yeah. But it's like, uh I for years I would say, "Oh, I would love to start a genre magazine, but I would be so hard for me because I just want to buy every single thing." And actually sitting down and being the person, even if I wasn't the person writing the checks, being the person
Hmm.
who has X many words of budget and having to like read through actual submissions, I was like, oh, no, there's definitely things.
Hmm. Right. And what's really interesting to me is when you can actually read all the way through something and say, wow, this is good. It's not what I want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
It's,
And like it's interesting that you said tags. I know that is something some authors will put their AO3 tags in their book, or at
hmm.
least in their book pitch.
Hmm.
But I primarily think of tags in the realm of fan fiction, which
I was
is
thinking of Goodreads because
oh
Goodreads
yeah,
also uses tags.
yeah,
And I guess most of the magazines that print short fiction don't use it, but I feel like tags has sort of become a way that people communicate
mm-hmm,
online. You don't see them a
yeah,
lot on social media for type of story, but you do now and then.
yeah, and I think that's something that uh, as as to at least certain groups of people, fan fiction becomes a bit less icky that we start seeing more of, which is good. I want people to not think of fan fiction as icky because fan fiction is amazing.
Well, I mean, I think that like anything that starts small, the parts that make their way into the public consciousness first are the most ridiculous ones.
Right, yeah.
So, I think that if you talk about fan fiction, most people will think that it's all slash fic and
Yeah.
proto Omegaverse stuff and all.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
But those are easy targets for people to make fun of.
It is. And
Although
and
they can be good.
they can be extremely good, and some of you can have like really amazing uh the Omegaverse framework can be the framework for some really amazing, you know, world building, commentary, all these sorts of things. And that's great, like, you know, and it just takes time for, like you said, it takes time for things to, like, filter through the public consciousness to the point that it's not just like, oh, ha ha ha, it's Kirk Spock / fiction, you know.
Right. Which, you know,
To,
could be marvelous. I don't
Mhm.
know. I don't actually read a lot of fan fiction, but I think that I think it can be very good for writers. I think that that working with something that has a lot of the world building already done, has a lot of the
Mhm.
characters already done, and that teaches you a lot about craft.
Yeah.
So I think it's useful for writers in that way. And you know, which is not to say like they're all practice stories because they can be
Mhm.
good. I just don't read a lot of it.
Yeah. Yeah, because I read slowly, I tend to be very selective about the fanfic that I read. So I tend to stick to specific fandoms, like a very narrow set of fandoms that I read
Hmm.
in for the most part.
That's reasonable. I mean, my
Which,
TBR is
yeah.
literally an earthquake hazard at this point.
Uh-huh. Yep, same, 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 same.
Yeah,
Uh,
I laugh at people who call it a TBR pile, and I'm like, really?
yeah.
Really? It's just one pile? Because I have five.
Uh-huh.
The one
I
by my
have,
bed is the one that's likeliest to kill me.
uh-huh. I have to winnow the bedside one down every few months because it starts becoming a threat. And either, like, just shelve the books so that they have a space on the shelf or move them to one of the ancillary TBR piles.
Yeah, I don't really have enough shelving to do that, unfortunately.
Oh, no, same.
There's
Big same.
just not
Uh,
enough shelves.
every time we just got through the Christmas season, and it is literally, as we are recording this, my birthday. Uh,
Happy birthday, Hilary!
thank you.
Birthday!
So I expect that I have already received several books this year and expect that I will receive several more that I will have to make space for on the shelves.
Are
Uh,
there any you're really looking forward to?
I'm really, so I'm really looking forward to digging into more. I just got past the introduction and translator's note on Emily Wilson's Iliad, which
Nice.
I adored her Odyssey. I read that 2 summers ago, 3 summers ago, 3 summers ago now. I had a summer of translations where I read her, uh, her Odyssey and Seamus Heaney's Beowulf and
Hmm.
Maria Dahvana Headley's Beowulf, just like in quick succession, back to back to back. And like, because actually I love the classics when they
Hmm.
are interpreted in really interesting ways.
Yeah, and I like having different versions.
Mm-hmm.
I actually collect different versions of Grimm's fairy tales.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, because then you can, if you want to dive into a story, you can
Mm-hmm.
open it up and really see how different people have handled them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's always fun.
My Iliad and Odyssey that I read in college, I borrowed from a friend, and so I don't have copies of that to do
Oh,
a comparative reading with. I'm really,
but those were probably Lattimore and Fitzgerald, right? So you could get those
it
anywhere.
was, uh, either Lattimore or Fagles for them.
Oh, Fagles. Yeah. Okay. You're
I
younger than
definitely
I
read the
am.
Fagles Aeneid.
Hmm. You're younger than I
Uh,
am if you had the Fagles.
yeah.
Fagles is good though.
Fagles is really good. And, you know, I really enjoyed the class that I read them for was just a class on epic and heroic uh, poetry. And so it was the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, and then Paradise Lost.
I really want
And
to read Paradise Lost all the way through. I've never have all the way
you
through.
have to read it out loud because they
Hmm.
hadn't invented quotation marks yet.
Hmm.
So the only way I could understand what was happening, and I mean, obviously, also, I was a college student reading this in the afternoons after finishing work and class for the day, and it's not that Paradise Lost itself is soporific, it is that any book at 3 in the afternoon, after you've
Hmm.
already had hours of work and class, is soporific.
Yes. Yes, there's actually a point, and I think it's supposed to be 12 hours from the midpoint of your nighttime sleep when you will get
Oh,
sleepy
huh.
again. Yeah. And for me, that does tend to be somewhere around between 2 and 3.
Yeah.
And that's when it is for most people. And unfortunately, the answer is not as I thought for yours, more caffeine.
No, unfortunate.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's,
It works better to just do something like try to get some fresh air or some
yeah.
walk around or something.
Yeah.
The things you learn when you're too old to like, make use of them in college.
Right, of
Why didn't
course.
I know this 30 years ago?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but for Paradise Lost, the best tip I have is read it out loud, use different funny voices for all the characters. So, like, Lucifer had a different voice than Beelzebub, had a different voice than
Hmm.
our Savior Jesus Christ, had a different voice than, on and on and on.
Like reading to kids only. It's Milton.
Yep.
That's fun. It seems like it would be a fun project to do together. Just
Yeah.
assign lines and run it with
If
somebody else.
if I had had anybody else taking that class who lived in the same dorm and had the same schedule as me, I think I would have done that, because that seems like the ideal way to do it. But yeah, so the Iliad, and then I'm really looking forward to Anne Leckie's translation state. I
Mm,
really, really need to read
mm.
that. I love the Radch books, absolutely love them, and keep on thinking I should just do a reread of the trilogy at some point because they are some of my favorite books. Um,
I don't do as many rereads as I used to. I just have so many things I need to read fresh, and it's
yeah,
sad because
yeah.
I used to really love rereads. I did recently read a book that was so artfully done. I went back and reread some of the earlier chapters
Oh,
to
nice. What
to
was it?
see. It just came out. It's The Jinn Waits 100 Years by Shubnam Khan.
Oh, I've heard good things about that.
It is amazing. She's a South African writer, and this is a Gothic that is written, it's set in Durban,
Oh,
and which is not a setting you see a whole lot.
mm-hmm, yeah.
And the characters are, I think almost all of them are ethnically Indian. And
Oh,
a lot of them are
wow.
actually even recent immigrants, which is not uncommon.
Mm-hmm.
That may be her background from her name. I can't say for sure because I don't know. But that, that makes it kind of interesting. And there are some things that I think I would have figured out a little bit faster if I had understood some
Mm-hmm.
of the terms. But I'm not mad that I didn't
Mm-hmm.
either. And it is really a quite an exquisite Gothic in the ways that matter to me for Gothic.
Mm-hmm.
Gothic has
Nice.
become very broad.
Yeah.
And, to some people, Gothics are always very romantic and, terrible weather and white nightgowns. And,
Mm-hmm.
those things are all great. But to me, the Gothic is about more than anything, isolation
Mm-hmm.
and a person with little power, usually a young one, sort of trying to navigate a societal structure that's
Mm-hmm.
supposed to take care of them, but actually doesn't.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what I love about Gothic because it makes these stories so personal and so big at the same time. So I feel like I learned a lot about that particular facet of society over the period of
Mm-hmm.
the 100 years because it's told in two different
Oh,
timelines.
that's so cool.
And it is beautiful. The writing is beautiful and it has all these different points of view, and they're not always neatly marked out,
Mm-hmm.
and that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, this is actually from the point of view of the house.
Uh-huh.
This is the point of view of the smells in the kitchen. This is the point of view of one of the minor characters, and it's beautiful. It's so well written. I really, really enjoyed it.
That's awesome. I love the way that you phrased what interests you about Gothics really solidified for me. Like, I've loved Gothics for a long time, but not really been able to pin down what exactly it is. But the things that you just said highlight, and like some of my favorite books that I've read in the last couple of years have been Gothics as well.
Mm-hmm. It's
That Ivy Noel Weir and Steens's Archival Quality, which is an amazing graphic novel that was inspired by Ivy's internship at the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia, which is
oh,
you know,
I've heard about it.
yeah. For folks who don't know, one, check out Ivy's episode where she reads the first draft of the short story that eventually became Archival Quality, the graphic novel. And two, the Mutter Museum is I think it's officially the Mutter Museum of the Philadelphia College of Physicians, and it's a museum that is intensely focused on the body and the ways that the body can be different. And it's very easy to say it is just a museum of medical oddities, and I think that that's, at this point in time, I understand that that is both kind of reductive and disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
But Archival Quality, like, if you know about the Mutter Museum, even if you don't know that link, you can feel it really intensely. And I think Ivy also calls it out in the afterword of the book. But yeah, Archival Quality, Sarah Gailey's Just Like Home, and then I think the two most recent novels from Caitlin Starling, The Death of Jane Lawrence, and then Last to Leave the Room, which just came out.
Oh, that one's Gothic too. I gotta catch up. I
It
love
is.
Yellow Jessamine.
Last to Leave the Room is a deeply complex, very good, very fucky book. It is very
That's on
Caitlin
brand.
Starling.
That's on brand.
Yeah.
I love Luminous Dead too. That is a fantastic book.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh my god, that book scares the shit out of me.
Oh, it's so good.
It's so
It's so
good.
good. But I love, I've always enjoyed Gothics, and I too had a lot of trouble understanding why they appealed to me so much because, it's a genre that a lot of people kind of sneer at,
Mm-hmm.
like they kind of sneer at romance, that it's, sort of, that it's like, bodice ripper girly stuff, which is, reductive and insulting. And
Yep.
I had a great chat with Megan E. O'Keefe about it at one point, who I think most people know for her science fiction work,
Mm-hmm.
but she's also extraordinarily well read in mysteries and gothics.
Mm-hmm.
And she told me about some nonfiction books that she had found interesting about gothics. And so I went and read a few of those, found a few more, some kind of scholarly ones, and really started to understand what made them so compelling for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Megan's great too.
Oh, she's amazing.
I'm trying to remember. I think we might have talked a little bit about mystery and stuff on the first time she came on Trunkcast. But
Mhm.
that was more than 4 years ago. So it's kind of hard to remember anymore.
Mhm.
We are now in season 6 of Tales from the Trunk.
What? Congratulations! That's awesome.
It's wild. It feels so unreal. I didn't even remember to say it on our last episode, the first episode of season 6 with Eddie Sway, until like right at the end of the episode when I was suddenly like, wait a minute, it's the 6th season.
Yep. Yeah, that happens to me with Story Hour sometimes too. I need to go and remember exactly what the debut date was because we're coming up on 4 years now.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a great segue. Uh, Listeners will have heard me mention Story Hour several times before, not the least because I was on Story Hour, but also I do make an attempt whenever possible to shout it out.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I have
Absolutely.
noticed that.
I think it's a uh, very fun and very important service. And something that, like, similar to how I started doing book tours on this show in the pandemic, is something that filled a need created by the pandemic, but continues to fill a need in this sort of, I don't want to call it post pandemic, but in this normalized COVID world.
That's a good way to put it. I've been calling it post-official pandemic, which is a little wordy.
Yeah.
Um,
So, what is Story Hour for people who maybe have missed out on every previous time I've mentioned?
Story Hour is an online weekly reading series that was founded by my co-host Daniel Marcus back in 2020. It was either March or April. It was,
Yeah.
right when the lockdown orders were coming and we were all freaked out and locked up. And he just wanted a place to hang out and read stories with his friends,
Mm-hmm.
see their faces and tell each other stories. And so it's just an hour when people show up and read complete stories. We did experiment for a little while with novel excerpts, and it's just not the same because if you
Mm-hmm.
have a complete story, and we have at least two complete stories because we have two writers come on and each read a complete story or a few smaller ones,
Mm-hmm.
you can sleep at night when it's over,
Yeah.
when you don't have to wonder how it's going to end. And he had that going for a few months, and then he said, "Oh, I'm thinking of cutting back frequency. It's getting to be a lot for one person." And I was just like, "Oh gosh, I
Mm-hmm.
really like this being weekly." And so I asked how I could help out, and he said I could use a co-host.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been a thing that I've been doing every Wednesday. And Daniel and I are there, and we bring in two different writers of some speculative fiction. We don't generally try too hard to match them up,
Mm-hmm.
although we do try to make sure that horror is sort of on its own night,
Right.
because if horror can be the more jarring thing if
Mm-hmm.
it's up against like a nice little cozy fantasy or something.
Yeah.
Because these are all things we love, but just because they're two great tastes doesn't mean they're great together.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to imagine how it would work to have, like, I don't know, like Steve Toce on the same episode as now I can't think of a single non-horror writer.
Right. I mean, like Amanda Cook and Steve Toes or something,
Oh
right?
yeah.
I mean, she writes this wonderful, affirming, good-hearted fantasy.
I
And I
love
love,
Amanda's
I
fiction.
do
It's
too.
so cozy.
It is. Joe Miles is another one who writes things that are not always necessarily cozy, but very thoughtful and good-hearted. And then,
Hmm.
Steve's work is bleak,
Yeah. I love
beautiful,
Steve's work.
exquisite, and bleak.
Yeah.
And, that can be pretty discordant.
Yeah.
So we try to do that. We also try to balance out the science fiction and fantasy with the horror because SIFWA has given us a giver's grant, and so we want to
Hmm.
make sure that they're well represented. And HWA also we don't have a grant or anything. I don't know if there is one I should be applying for, but HWA,
HWA, send Story Hour money.
yeah, it does publish um, story hour announcements in its newsletters.
Hmm.
So, we want to make sure that we're representing the people of both organizations somewhat.
Yeah.
And speaking of money, nobody makes money at Story Hour. So the
Hmm.
grant is literally just for keeping the website going
Yep.
and keeping our Zoom subscription up because we have this a kind of unusual way of doing it. We have a live through Zoom and then everything is saved on Facebook.
Hmm.
And so you can watch Story Hour on Facebook. You don't actually have to have a Facebook subscription. If you have a link, you can just get in.
Yep.
But one thing that's kind of fun about this is that I've discovered that some of my, former classmates and relatives, people who I didn't think were especially interested in Story Hour type of
Hmm.
stories, really enjoy them.
Yep.
And that's been really nice. And it's also very easy there for authors to share. And so then it's really quite heartwarming seeing, people's aunties and uncles leaving comments on how
Yeah.
great they did. But yeah,
Yeah. I love that.
I love it too. And I'm just so floored every week with the quality of fiction that we're hearing because these are just
Hmm.
authors coming on and reading their own work.
Yeah.
And it's even if it's already been professionally narrated, and it often has been before, which we're happy with. We like
Hmm.
it if they can get money for their stories first.
Yeah.
It,
Please.
yeah, even if it's been professionally narrated by an actor and been scored and everything, it's still really neat to hear the author reading it in
Hmm.
their own voice. It
Yeah.
like we were saying about looking at your different translations.
Yeah. Yeah. It's there's something so gosh, I think it's Pratchett who talks about storytelling human
Hmm.
as like, we talk so much about like uh, you know, tool use being the sign of like, oh, this is an advanced organism, but like that, yeah, tool use is great, but like storytelling is where it's at. That like that's what we understand as something that separates us
Hmm.
from other animals. Not that that's necessarily true. We do not. We know that like crows talk to each other about things all the time,
Oh my gosh.
but you know that like the act of and tying that back to the epic tradition of Greek poetry, that like Homer may not have ever been a real person. We have this understanding of Homer as, this one guy, but like the Iliad did not start or end with one mononymic poet.
Hmm.
Um,
And you
you
have to
know.
wonder how little things crept in, who had a
Mm-hmm.
turn of phrase that caught on or who had a drum to beat about some particular issue or kind of character,
Yeah.
wanted to show a certain city in a certain light.
Yeah. And in her introduction to the Iliad, Wilson talks about how in the original Greek, going off of, I think, the Oxford text, like, you really see that there are so many different, like, dialects and modes of ancient Greek throughout the Iliad that really reflect that this is something that was passed down orally and, touched by 100 hands, 1,000 hands before it ever got written down.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, that's what we're doing here with Story Hour. Like, you're never gonna get even the best narrator is never going to give a clean reading in one take, and there's something charming about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always say just keep reading.
Mm-hmm.
People are like, "Oh, what if I stumble?" Well, you just keep reading.
Yep.
I mean, everybody does. I mean, okay, there are a few people who don't, and they're amazing. But
Yeah.
I've watched the audience as readers are reading their stories, and I've watched, and when there's a stumble, no one's like,
Mm-hmm.
no one's mad, no one's growling about it. They're just hanging there like, more story.
Mm-hmm.
Let's hear more of the story.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem to really bother them. They just want to keep having their story.
Mm-hmm. For real. So I don't know if this came through over the Zoom link or what. There was this weird sound, like, I don't know, it was kind of like somebody was rubbing a wrench against a bass piano string or something, and this blue police box showed up in the room, the podcast room. And I'm wondering if we can take a step into this time machine, go back, and if there are any words of wisdom that you can offer to younger writer Laura, and by extension to our listeners.
Looking at this story in particular, I want to tell her that she needs to play around more. She needs to be playful. She needs to experiment, and she needs to work on things that she's enjoying.
Hell yeah.
And I would also tell her that she needs to be more serious about the career side.
Mm-hmm.
To make art, to try to make art, to have fun, but also to see to work on craft, to play, but also to learn and to try to get things out there, to try to establish herself better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really, that really is the thing of, like, you can tell when people are enjoying themselves, and it makes it so much more engaging.
Right. I mean, looking at the story, you can tell that I know nothing about police work.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really try that hard to research it. I apparently thought I knew something, but I look at so many things and I'm just like, oh, wow, this is really ringing false even to me. And of course, now I'm very uncomfortable trying to even write anything with police in it because I just,
right.
Yeah. This story has really lived through some changes in our society or some events that have made things known.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I'm very uncomfortable with the murder of a young woman as well. Lots of stuff. But, it's funny looking back. I mean, did you know that Premi Mohammed and I actually had our first pro sale in the same book?
Amazing.
Right? And she has so many books of her own out now.
She has, like, 18 books coming out this year.
And they're all fantastic. Everything I've read of hers is always fantastic. Now, I am not going to be like, gosh, if I'd just taken things more seriously, I would be just as successful and wonderful as Premi Mohammed, because, it doesn't necessarily follow.
Right.
But also, maybe if I'd gotten off my duff a bit more, I could be further than I am.
Mm-hmm.
Because she's really doing stuff.
Yeah.
from the same start.
Yeah. Yeah. I look at, I think our first episode that we recorded together was pre the release of Beneath the Rising.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, like, I had her on to talk about And What Can We Offer You Tonight, which has a Nebula award now.
Yep. Although, I loved Annual Migration of Clouds more.
Mm-hmm. I don't know that I can compare them because they're both stunningly beautiful and extremely different. But
they are. It may just be a matter of taste.
Yeah.
And I'm fine with that.
The Butcher of the Forest just came out and is incredible.
Where is my copy? I pre-ordered it. I should have it by now.
Oh, I have an ARC, so...
I feel like pre-orders should be shipped so that you get them on release day.
I strongly agree.
I don't think it's fair that you put in a pre-order and then you have to wait.
Yeah.
While other people are going online and going, oh, it's fantastic.
Even worse, some of my friends in Australia, it took weeks for them to get the newest Murderbot book after it came out.
Really?
Yeah. It's
just because of shipping?
A crime.
Oh, that's terrible.
I know.
Oh, that's terrible.
Which, speaking of books that I'm glad that I had an ARC of, and also it was an absolute torture to have an ARC of.
Why? Why would it be torture to have an ARC?
I couldn't talk to anybody about it.
Oh, okay. I can see that.
There were 2 other people on the fandom Discord server who had read it. And, sure, getting to talk to 2 other people about this thing is great, but when you're in a server of 900 people,
mm-hmm.
The Category 1 nerd event that happened the day System Collapse released, and the people who blitzed through it 3 times in 24 hours, and... suddenly all of the new meta and all of the new fan fiction that was appearing, and...
Oh my god.
The juicy stuff. This server does a New Year's Fanworks gift exchange, and so the amount of post-System Collapse work from this year's gift exchange was just phenomenal.
Is that Yuletide?
No, it's I don't even know if Murderbot qualifies for Yuletide anymore. I think the fandom might be too big.
Oh, interesting. See, like I said, I hear a little about fanfic, but I don't really know that much about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, the server itself organizes a gift exchange, which is another one of those, we couldn't be in this amazing place with fandom if we didn't have amazing volunteers.
Yeah. But you hear how much more animated we are talking about books that we love than talking about this fragment that I just read. I mean, I feel like if I had been more succinct about when talking to this person in the blue box, that I'd have just said, love your work enough to be playful with it and love it enough to take it seriously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hell, that's a tagline right there.
Right? I mean, it only took me 3 minutes of mumbling to get with it, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's what we were talking about since the very beginning. We had the skeleton there and figured out something to do with it.
Yeah, although, this story's never going to go anywhere. Poor Prisoners is never going to go anywhere because I'm not comfortable with the police stuff. The mystery element is not great. I'm not comfortable with the murder of a young woman who is murdered because she reminds somebody who's been reconditioned of an exit interview or something with an older woman.
Mm-hmm.
And, the reason I initially put it aside was that I was just like, wow, this just seemed like it would be something incels would think is awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that you can kill women because they remind you of other women. Great. And it's totally not your fault
Yeah.
because of how you've been programmed. And I was like, I could gender flip it and that would solve that problem, but there's still
Yeah.
problems with it. Because, what I wanted to get into was just that, you can try to overwrite a person, but even if you do, you make new problems because no one really has the right to do that. They had
Mm-hmm.
successfully eliminated a serial killer and created this person who just had this weird this weird memory of trauma caused by this
Right.
doctor, this woman. And, that's not a bad point.
Mm-hmm.
You could work with that in some way at some point. I'm not the only person who's ever thought of it, I'm sure. So it's not like I'm blowing anything talking about it here.
Yeah.
But, exploring it out in this really not very good mystery that's very badly paced was just not the
Mm-hmm.
answer. Although I may loot some of the stuff about the setting and the weather, because I grew up in Grand Forks and I believe that I am pretty accurate in how I
Yeah.
described it.
Yeah. It, like, when I was listening to it, I could feel the places where it was written from some place of deep love and deep care, where it's like, oh yeah, I know a lot actually about what winter weather looks like, and the experience of, like, I've stepped outside. I've never lived someplace as cold as the Dakotas, but I went to school in the mountains. I know what it's like to step outside and
Hmm.
feel it in your teeth.
Right, right. Have your earring posts hurt. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
and people always think snow is like this beautiful blanket. They don't think about how it gets dirty with
Uh-huh.
exhaust and they clear it off the roads, and so you end up with these weird chunks
Yeah.
off to the
Awful
side, all those
brown gray
mountains.
chunks on the side,
Yep, yep.
and they're just full of soot and diesel smoke and,
In North
you
Dakota,
know.
they actually call it snert. Um, they say that some of it is actually the dirt because, it's the Red River Valley of the North. It was
Oh,
carved
yeah,
out.
yeah.
It was Lake Agassiz a long, long time ago. And so it's this, beautiful black glacial soil. It's very,
Mm-hmm.
very good for growing crops. And is not really pretty mixed with snow.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I can probably just get a lot of that stuff out of my memories, honestly. Looking at this, I just felt a great feeling of chagrin and then some pride at how far I've come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And, like, getting back to that thing from the beginning, like, looking at your old work with fondness and compassion.
Yeah, I tend to think of stories kind of like I think of my hamsters. They may be kind of dumb, but they're cute and I still love them.
Mm-hmm. That's healthy. That sounds great.
But I don't love this story anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There are a few things about it that I like, but that's what
Yeah.
that made me go, I'm giving up on this one. I can actually take this one and read it on Tales from the Trunk because it should never be printed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't that funny that this really is for
It's
things that shouldn't be printed?
yeah.
And you've gotten
Oh.
6 seasons out of this.
And I've gotten 6 seasons. I keep getting people who want to come on and do this. It's incredible. I love it.
And it amazes me that you actually get people like Marie Brennan. I'm like,
Yeah.
she had something that shouldn't be printed, really?
Yeah. I am constantly shocked and amazed and excited by I said this last episode. It's no longer a spoiler unless you missed last episode, in which case listeners go back, listen to last episode, because 80 Sway is awesome. But, like, it's not for a trunk, it's for a book tour, but I'm getting Ursula Vernon on later this year.
Nice.
And, like, how cool is that? And, like, I got to talk to Martha Wells. I got to talk to, I keep getting to talk to Sarah Gailey. They will always be on this show. I got to talk to Chuck Tingle. Like, that's crazy bananas.
That's awesome. And we've all got something. We've
all got something.
Got those trunk stories. Even though it took me a while to admit it.
But you got there. You found it.
Yep.
And all thanks to a jerk messing with the Hugos.
Yeah, that did get me thinking about it because, complicity is a theme that I find very interesting. And complicity and isolation are two things I find interesting. And I work with those a lot in my stories and in the novel I'm querying as well.
And in Gothics.
Yes. Well, it is a Gothic novel, in fact.
Yep.
So I went back and was like, I wonder if there's anything I can do with that. And I went back and looked at it and wow, no. Oh, no, there is a thing I can do with it. I can talk to Hilary about it.
Yeah, hell yeah. Possibly the best thing you can do with something out of the trunk.
Oh, absolutely. It's really making lemonade out of lemons.
Yeah. Oh. Well, Lara, before we get going, I know we've already talked about Story Hour. Is there anything in the wider media landscape that you've been consuming recently that you would just love for our listeners to know about?
Well, gosh, I told you about The Gin Waits 100 Years. That is a fantastic book. Right now I'm doing a lot of reading for the Stokers.
Oh,
so
nice.
I can be educated when I vote for those. My front runner right now I've been reading the first novels, and I think my favorite is Sam Rebeline's Edenville.
Ooh.
Yeah, which is kind of cosmic folk horror, dark academia.
Oh.
But very smart alecky, because that's Sam.
I'm here for that.
Yeah, it is a very enjoyable book. Yeah. I mean, I would have to say that of the non-Stoker stuff I've read, The Gin Waits 100 Years by Shubnam Khan is really something I recommend.
Yeah. And I will say on the Stoker stuff, if you haven't checked out Camp Damascus,
there's a copy in the house.
That book.
There's a copy in the house. And that actually had an interesting case because it was originally on the ballot as a young adult novel.
Oh, yeah.
And it just got moved.
Oh, wild.
Because they said this is not a young adult novel. And so they moved it off and moved up another one. And I think that they moved it over to best novel. I think that they didn't take it off the ballot. I could be misremembering.
Yeah.
But that is another one of the many, many things I'm hoping to read quickly. And,
I think that you will love Camp Damascus.
I'm excited.
It was one of my top novels of last year. And it made me feel a lot of things. It made me feel seen in a really amazing way. It's got an autistic main character who the whole book is through her point of view, and in that way it is an own voices book, and you can tell the amount of love that Chuck has for his own autism.
Oh gosh, that's not something you get to hear about much.
Yeah.
I love my brain. That's a great thing to say.
Gorgeous. It is gorgeous, and it is also deeply creepy and has just such a satisfying, the final kill is so satisfying in that book.
Is it really a slasher?
It's not exactly a slasher. It's it's more a monster book
Okay,
than it
good.
is a slasher.
I have a little trouble with slashers.
Yeah. But it is very the ending is very Hellraiser.
Okay.
In a very, very satisfying way. I think I can say that without it being a spoiler, because I'm not saying anything else, but it is like you can go through the book and see like, oh, this is about this movie, this is about this thing, this is about this thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it comes together in a way that's really, it's more than just the sum of its parts.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the way
Yeah.
horror often is, I think, and a lot of good books in general.
Yeah. And it's extremely satisfying. It's extremely spooky. It's, it's got a couple of gross kills in it, but for the most part, it is much more psychological and much more. The horror of the monsters is secondary to the horror of the people.
Mm-hmm. I always love that.
Yeah.
I remember feeling a great swelling of pride when a young member of my family borrowed my Death Note uh, manga and said, Light seems like he's all perfect, and Rick is so scary, but Light is the real monster. I'm like, yep,
Yep. Ryuk
yep.
is fine.
Good job, kid.
Light is a creepo.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I watched the Netflix adaptation, and it's not horrible for what it is, but it's not Death Note.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely one of those things. If you want to consume Death Note, either read it or watch the anime.
I've never seen the
I
anime.
really liked the anime. It is also deeply silly in some places, which, there are some parts that have been memed to death, either from there's a fan dub, or a fan sub that is has a couple of good memes that came out of it, and then just one scene is just deeply, deeply silly with the potato chips bag. He stashes a TV in a bag of potato chips and eats a chip very dramatically. Very funny. But
have you heard the musical?
I have not.
I'm not sure if it's ever been produced, but you can find the music from the musical.
Oh, incredible. I'm going to look that up after this.
Yeah, it's a little simplified from what I would like, but it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, Laura, thank you again so much for coming on the show. It's been such a delight having you.
It has been so much fun to come here and chat with you, Hilary. I've had such a great time, and there are not a lot of people I would trust to read that story to. So thank you.
Oh, finally, really finally, before we go, where can our listeners find you elsewhere?
Oh, well, I have a handle on the internet that looks great written out and is terrible to do aloud. It's pronounced Laura, so it's pronounced Lahra.
Yep.
And that is my website, pronouncedlaura.com. I use it on Blue Sky. I use it on Twitter when I'm there, which is less often. I use it on Instagram, where I mostly just post pictures of horrible cereals from the grocery store and stuff like that. And I also use it on Mastodon Wandering Shop instance.
Yep.
What else? Are there any other social media that I'm forgetting? I think those are the main ones for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do keep my website updated, so when I have a new story out, you can always find links there if you're not following me on social media.
I am jealous of your strength and dedication in that regard.
Well, when you publish relatively slowly, it's not that hard.
Yeah. Well, Laura, again, thank you so much. Listeners, stick around next month when my guests will be John Wiswell and Ivy Fox. Yeah, I'm talking to. I'm recording with John this afternoon, actually.
Oh, say hi for me.
I will do that. Tales from the Trunk is mixed and produced in beautiful Oakland, California. Our theme music is Paper Wings by Lillian Boyd. You can support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/trunkcast. All patrons of the show now get a sticker and logo button, along with show outtakes and other content that can't be found anywhere else. You can find the show on Blue Sky at Trunkcast, and I post at HB Bisenieks. If you like the show, consider taking a moment to rate and review us on your preferred podcast platform. And remember, don't self-reject.